just to review the three methods, I've got little names for them now. We had the crisscross joining method, where we put the fabrics perpendicular to one another, and we sewed a straight line, and we don't sew this way into the corner because that's why Becky hates this method, because I always do that. We sew from here out. So picture, you know what? I've thought of a way to remember this. Picture this is a little man, and these are legs, and he needs a belt. The other method we talked about was using the corner clipper, and I can demo it with, you can use an OmniGrid or the easy angle ruler works too. Basically what we did on that is we put both layers face up, like so, and then we put our little ruler on here, like so, cut it, turned them over, lined them up notch to notch, and sewed a 1/4 inch seam. Whack-a-doodle method is, I turn one over. I don't turn the other one over. Whoops, I need a piece that's not hacked off. Okay, like this. I put my glue within a 1/4 inch of this guy. I line it up over here. Whoops. I see it. I see it. I believe it. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. No pins. Press, press, press. Perfection. But anyway, so those are our three methods, okay? I don't care which one you use. Pick one that works for you. That's what's most important. For me, it's the whack-a-doodle method.
And as a note, you do want to attach all bindings on an angle like that because of the bulk that you will get if it's a straight seam.
You can do straight seams.
I've
had quilts given to me with straight seams on them.
You can do straight seams, but the reason that you connect it at an angle is because you get a bulk where you start to fold things together.
In fact, one of the things I'm going to tell you to do is audition your strips before you adhere them, so you don't end up with a bunch of seams near a corner, which I have here. Can you show that, Brent? But because it's on an angle, it was still very doable. See how I get a seam right there? That's like a no-no. You really don't want a seam right there. But what you want to do after you attach all your strips, does everyone know how to figure out how much binding you need?
No. Well, I do. I come to Brent.
Okay, you measure all the circumference of your quilt, which is side A plus side B plus side C plus side D. You add those all together.
Circle, it would be pi r squared.
Pi r squared. Well, we're not doing circles today, but that's okay. What we do is we take that and I add 20 inches. 20 inches. You can get away with less than that, but I like it long.
My calculation is I get the circumference,
Yep.
length and width times 2.
Yep.
I divide that by 40 and round up.
Why do you divide it by 40?
Because you have 42 inches usable on the fabric,
Oh,
and then if you round up, you're sure to have extra.
Yep.
And if you're close, if you're exactly on, always add an extra strip.
Yep.
But that's just the quick formula I use.
That's good. One of the questions that came up was bias versus straight last week. And I actually brought in a strip that's cut on the bias. A bias strip is cut on a 45-degree angle. I think everybody knows, but you have the straighter grain, and then when you cut to the 45, that gives you a bias strip. And I had said that I would do that if I had a directional fabric, because and I consider this directional, there are stripes in this. If I try to cut that straight and put that on in binding, it gets a little dicey, because if you're off just a little bit on here, it starts to look yucky very quickly. But if it's on a bias and you put it on your quilt, look how pretty that is. See how cutting it on a bias makes this so pretty? And also, if you're doing anything with a curve on it, bias, bias, bias. It's the only good way to get around the curves. Let's talk about how we put this on. Most people,
It is.
I think, use...
On the long arm, it shows up awful.
Most people use a 1/4 inch, I think, on their top on their bindings. I like a half inch. I go through all this work to make a quilt. It takes me months and months and months. I want to show off my binding. I also like piping and faux flanges.
Love flange.
Yeah, with my binding. So to me, okay, making the quilt is like baking the cake. Quilting the quilt is like putting icing on the cake. Binding your quilt is like piping happy birthday on your cake.
Aww.
It's like the final hoopla. And I'll tell you what, you go to the shows and you look at bindings, you will see who wins. And a lot of times it comes down to binding. Okay, the other reason I like this technique that we're going to show you, where we start from the front and move to the back, is I will machine bind when it's not a quilt I've spent 6 months making. But if it's a quilt that let's be honest, that I've spent 6 years making, I will not machine bind it. I will sit here and do the whole thing by hand, because I have so much work into it, and it's not something I'm going to let my dog on. It's an heirloom to me. At that point, no, but you can look at it, but don't touch it. It's one of those quilts.
I agree.
And this method allows me to make that decision at the very end. So if I get to the end of the quilt and I go, oh, I don't feel like hand binding this. Okay, well, set up to machine bind anyway, so good to go. So that's why I like this. There are 3 different ways to adhere it. Well, there's probably 100 different ways, okay? I'm going to show you 3. Brenda is the crisscross applesauce girl, and she likes to take her binding, and she uses 2.5 inches. She puts it on here. No pinning, no ironing. She hand folds it. She puts her 1/4 inch foot on her machine, and she sews. So she gets to the corner, then she eyeballs the corner, and she keeps going. Now that's great if you've done 1,000 binding strips. But those of us who have not, this is a little intimidating to me. So good for you, Brenda. That's called fly by the seat of your pants binding.
That's called
How much
doing
tail?
a lot of them.
How much tail do you leave? About 10
Oh, yeah.
inches, 12
At
inches?
least that on
Okay.
both sides.
Yeah, when we start off, no matter what technique you use, guys, I don't want you to start in a corner. I want you to start in the middle or down here somewhere. These were small, so telling you joining them was a bear because they were so small, but still doable. Bigger quilts a little easier. But leave this tail, because this is going to come in handy when we go to join the 2 pieces together, and you need enough to work with over here, okay? So Brenda's going to do this, and she's going to put a 1/4 inch foot on, and she's going to sew along. Danny is going to take her strip and use 2.5 inches too, right? She's going to take her strip to the iron, and she's going to iron it in half like this, the whole length. She's going to get it nice and pretty, and then she's going to take it over here. She's going to leave a good tail, like 12-inch tail. She's going to take her wonder clips. See, Brenda doesn't use wonder clips.
Now, a note on
I
folding
do,
your.
but not on binding.
Now, ironing your binding in half, something to keep in mind is after you roll it over, the thickness of the quilt actually throws that crease off, so it doesn't line up, so it shifts a little bit.
That's why they like 2.5 inches. That gives them room in the back.
Yeah,
That
but
gives them extra room in the
what I'm
back.
saying is you're going to see that crease actually rolls a little bit. And it doesn't line up exactly where you think it should because of the thickness of the quilt, which is why some people would say don't iron your binding.
That's why I don't iron my bindings.
You still fold it in half.
Yes, but by ironing, you're putting a crease in it.
Yes.
And
Okay.
that crease doesn't stay where it's supposed to because it's of the thickness of the quilt.
Okay. Now,
Sciencey.
remember we
I'm
talked
following the
about
science.
putting this binding on, and we talked about using this nifty little tool called the Perfect Binding Miter. I don't care what size seam allowance I'm going to do. The whole idea is to get a good mitered joint to this corner. That's really what it is. But in Danny's case, she would line up this little piece with the top edge of the fabric and the bottom edge of the fabric, and she would mark it. That's where she's going to sew off the fabric. But she's not going to mark it yet. Because what's going to happen as she sews, even though she went through the work of putting this on, is this is going to shift. And until she gets close to the corner, she's not going to have an accurate measurement of where to sew off. So she's going to take it over to her machine. She's going to sew the 1/4 inch. Then she's going to take it off her machine when she gets a couple inches away from the corner. She's going to draw her little ending piece here. She's going to sew, and then come off right at the corner. So, but now what she's going to do, and I didn't mention this, and I want to mention this because this is important. No matter which method you use, in Danny's method, she's got a seam right there that tells her exactly where to fold the fabric. So isn't that nice? It's going to force the fabric in the right direction. When you go up and then you come down, be careful not to overlap the edge of your quilt. In fact, you're better off being a smidgen short. If you go over it like this, you are going to have a devil of a time getting pretty corners. You want to come down here a ways like this. I can see, I don't know, it's 32nd of an inch. I can see it. That's the important thing. See, I can see it. That's where you want to pin this and start sewing.
A tip that I always tell people when they're doing binding: raw edges to the outside. If you're having
Oh, definitely.
but it's one of those things that
Yeah.
if you're having trouble turning the corner, a lot of times that can get tricky. But if you always remember that the raw edges are all to the outside, it makes it easier as you struggle through the first couple.
Yeah.
And then once you do a bunch of them,
So then I'm going to
second
do this,
nature.
and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch, and I'm going to sew till I get to a couple inches before this one. Then I'm going to mark my mitered corner again.
For
Well,
years,
what I wanted to say about that little gadget is, what I discovered is, and I like the little gadget, what I discovered is you could take any of these as well and draw, put them like whatever it is, if it's a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch, put that line where it needs to be, lining up with the fabric right here, because really what it's giving you is that angle.
right.
So you could use one of these as well and just draw, and as soon as you sew where it starts to intersect that line, that's where you come off the fabric. So it isn't critical that the length of this line be 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch or a 1/4 inch. What's critical is that it be a 45-degree angle to this blue fabric here. Does that make sense?
To the corner, 45 to the corner.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you don't, you're just take the same ruler, but you got to think, am I doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance or a 1/4 inch seam allowance? That's going to dictate where I set the markings on this ruler. We've got this clippity-doo method in half. We've got Brenda's I can sew with my eyes closed method. And now I'm going to show you wackadoodle.
Now-
So far, it's just about how we're putting it on this. After we get it on,
So we don't
they're
care
all
how they've
the
been joined.
same.
Yeah, we don't care how they've been joined.
We don't care how they're going to be joined. And we're just deciding, am I putting it on freehand with no ironing and no pinning? Am I folding it in half, ironing it, and adhering it with wonder clips? Or am I taking a piece that's not ironed at all? Oh, and remember what I talked about the seam allowance? This is what I mean about auditioning. Like if I have a seam here, I would kind of guesstimate it around my quilt before I attached anything to get an idea where I wanted to start and try and keep these seams out of the corners. So I've already guesstimated on my quilt. I'm going to start it right about here. This is a 2 1/4 inch strip. Turn this over. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The same method works with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You just don't need as wide a strip if you're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you guessed it.
I'm gonna glue it
Look
like
what happens.
what's the leprechaun? Is it a cow?
No, what is Elmer's?
This doesn't take any longer than my wonder clips, and it stabilizes everything. So instead of going back and forth to the machine, I can mark my miters right now. Okay.
See, we're all learning today.
Do you see what's on my machine, peeps? I have guides and lasers, but I wanted to give you another way to line up stuff. Washi tape is your friend on your sewing bed. You probably could use the other
I was
tape
gonna say
too,
your
but
magical,
it's clear.
your magical.
Yeah, but it's clear. This is easier for me to see, and it comes off easy. You know, you can mark. I marked 1/2 inch this way. You can mark 1/4 inch. You can mark whatever you want with washi tape. Also, the other thing I did, even though I've got this line drawn, is I marked 1/2 inch this way. So I know when my fabric lines up with this, I'm 1/2 inch away. So I theoretically know where to stop, can pivot and sew off without marking it. And you could do this with 1/4 inch as well. So I'm doing a dark fabric. I would normally match the fabric. Oh my gosh, this Pokey Joe. Would normally match my fabric. I do not start and stop at the beginning no matter which method you use, because if you have to pull out because you didn't leave enough tail, now you got a knot to deal with. So don't worry about it.
Yes.
You'll catch it later.
Reinforced stitching is a pain in the butt.
Well, you have to do it. Actually, I forgot to mention last week, I would reinforce on the joining of my strips. One reason I had a wonky thing is because I didn't reinforce, so one end was coming out and the other one wasn't. So I do reinforce when I'm joining my strips, but not at this point. I'm just sewing and sewing and sewing and sewing and sewing. Now see, I'm at my hat. I'll show it in a minute. Can you catch this fabric? Can you see where it's lining up now?
I'm gonna zoom way in and make sure
I know I'm a
sees
1/2 inch away. If I were doing a 1/4 inch seam, I would have set my tape up at 1/4 inch. It's a nice little reminder for me. So I don't really have to even mark my fabric. But if you're just getting going and you want it to be just right, marking the fabric. But look at, guess what didn't move?
Look at that.
My corner.
It did not move.
My corner is staying where it is.
I'd rather watch you than the fabric because you do some funky moves up there.
Pivot. Now I'm just going to sew off my fabric, remember? Now what we have, my friends, is the beginning of a perfect miter. And watch what happens. I have no guesswork now. I know to bring my fabric up. Oh wait, it's going to stop right there automatically. Right? I got a nice seam. Isn't that cool? And then, yes, guess what Becky's going to do?
Gonna glue it. And I'd also like to point out for those that aren't paying attention
Whoops.
that even though we talked about folding and all that, you are not folding this. In this method, you have not folded anything.
Not yet.
You're doing one layer of the binding strip.
One layer, no folding at this point.
Yeah.
Now, when I come down, remember what I said about scoot it down a little bit? Scoot it down a little bit. I want to see just a little bit of that top peeking out.
And you can get
So
more
again,
info.
I'm going to take this nifty little tool. I'm going to line it up in the corner. And I'm going to draw a line.
Now, where do you get the washi tape?
Oh my gosh, any local craft store.
Okay.
And guess what's lining up with my washi tape? See that?
Washi. I can think of some dirty little.
Pivot, sew off. Meow. That's 2 sides of my quilt done already. Now, guess what I got? I got a perfect, no guess, no fuss, no mess way of tidying that up. And guess what I'm going to do? So there I go. I'm leaving just a smidgen at the top. Okay, and I'm coming down. Oh, look at it. It's a little close to the corner for my liking, but we're going to use it. And I'm simply pressing. It's literally seconds, too. And you see how little, and this glue's watered down a little bit. It's not even full strength. The other thing that I love about the glue is if you go, I'm not happy with that alignment, you just pull it up. So now I'm going to sew this one all the way. Oh, look what I just did. Which is why I have washi tape.
Oh, you wandered off.
I didn't line it up with my washi tape.
Oh no.
Okay. All right, we're on the home stretch here, guys. And again, going around these corners is the same no matter what technique we covered tonight. okay?
Yeah, regardless if it's
Except
folded
I'm
in-
being picky and drawing a little line, but really, you want good corners, go off at an angle. Some people go straight off the top like this. That works, but this gives you, it's like folding your bed sheets. It gives you the mark. And some people just stop here and then knot their thread. Why bother? It's just so easy to just sew off on the angle and then you're done.
And even if you have it folded in half, doing your corners and everything will still come out. It's still the same process.
So again, I'm making sure I come down there just a little bit. And again, if I were doing a big quilt, I might put glue on, like a couple feet, then slide up, then re-glue. Now, keep in mind, all of these techniques, these are prepped pieces of fabric. That, I feel, is very important for binding, period. Remember I talked about starching or starch alternative, or see, these are handling very nicely, and they have good memory because they've been pre-treated. Plus you get better results cutting them. You know what, binding is a lot like politics, though. You know what I'm saying? It's like you don't want to discuss it at the family table, because everybody's got their own opinion, you know.
We can't talk
Oh, I know. I'm gonna unfriend you on Facebook now because you do bindings weird.
I'm just gonna finish this last corner, just so, and you all get a piece of fabric at home and try all three methods and see which one you like so far. And Brenda's method, I didn't attach it so I can do it the other way next week. She's gonna start from the back. Do you start from the back, Danny?
I do sometimes. It depends.
Okay, interesting. I always start from the
I'm-
front because I might want to hand miter it. Hand
So-
sew it.
Never do.
But you've really sold me on this glue idea. I'm very intrigued by it.
So this is my last corner.
It's great.
And I'm not going to go all the way down because we're going to leave some tails, and that's where we'll start with next week with some. Whoops, I didn't start right at the end. I want to start right at the end. Okay, so what we've got is either our binding attached to the front or our binding attached to the back. And I'll actually go for next week. I'll prep Brenda's from the back, so
Okay.
we can see the difference between doing it from the back and the front. Okay, so try getting to this point. Okay,
With your preferred method.
with your preferred method, yeah. And just leave tails for now, because next week we'll start with getting rid of our tails on all three methods. We'll turn them, and I'm going to show you how beautiful they all look when we turn them.